If you're over 60 and you regularly reheat your food, this may be one of the most important warnings you hear today. Because there are at least 5 everyday foods many older adults eat every single week, that can quietly become harmful when reheated, in ways that may increase toxic buildup in the body and even raise long-term cancer risk. Now here's the part most people never hear. It's not just about what you eat anymore. It's about what happens to that food after it's been cooked once, cooled, and then heated again. In my experience, many seniors are doing this with the best intentions, saving time, avoiding waste, eating healthy leftovers. But what I often see in older patients is that these small, repeated habits can slowly add stress to the body in ways that are easy to miss, until symptoms begin to show. You may be wondering, how could something as simple as reheating food cause a problem? That's exactly what I'm going to explain. Because once you understand what's really happening inside these foods and inside your body, you'll see why some of these common habits are worth changing. Before we go further, I'd really like to hear from you. How old are you? And which food do you find yourself reheating the most during the week? Is it potatoes, chicken, rice, or maybe leftovers like sausages or fried foods? Go ahead and share that in the comments. I read these personally, and it also helps me understand what many older adults are dealing with day to day, so I can guide you better in future videos. And if one of those foods you mentioned is on today's list, don't worry. I'm going to show you exactly what's happening and what you can do about it. Let's start with something very common in almost every kitchen: potatoes. Now, most people think of potatoes as simple, harmless comfort food. And when they're freshly cooked, they usually are. But here's what many older adults do not realize. It's not the potato itself that becomes the problem. It's what happens after it's cooked, left sitting, and then reheated. In my experience, I've seen many seniors cook a batch of potatoes, leave them out on the counter for a while, then store them and reheat them later without thinking twice. It feels safe. It feels normal. But this is where things can quietly go wrong. Let me explain it in a simple way. When cooked potatoes cool down, their structure begins to change. Some of the starch turns into what we call resistant starch. Now, in small amounts, that can actually be helpful. But when potatoes are improperly stored, especially if they sit at room temperature too long, bacteria can begin to grow. Think of it like this. A warm, cooked potato left out is like a soft sponge sitting in a damp sink. It becomes a perfect place for unwanted growth. You may not see it, you may not smell it, but it can still be there. Then comes the reheating. Here's the part most people miss. Reheating does not always destroy the toxins that certain bacteria can produce. So even if the potato is hot again, those harmful compounds may still be present. And for a body over 60, this matters more. Your digestive system may not handle these toxins as easily. What I often see in older patients is symptoms like bloating, discomfort, or a general feeling of heaviness after eating leftovers. And they never connect it back to something as simple as reheated potatoes. Over time, repeated exposure to these small stresses can contribute to inflammation. And that's something we always want to reduce as we age. So what can you do about it? First, never leave cooked potatoes sitting out for long. Try to refrigerate them within 1 to 2 hours. Second, when you do reheat them, do it thoroughly, but only once. Reheating the same food multiple times increases the stress on your system. And third, if something smells even slightly off, trust your instincts. It's better to let it go than to let it affect your body. So the takeaway here is simple. Potatoes are not the enemy, but how you handle them after cooking makes all the difference between something nourishing and something that quietly works against your health. Now let's move to something that often goes completely unnoticed, but in my clinical experience, can be one of the most damaging habits over time. And that is reheating cooking oils, especially when they've already been used once. Many older adults do this without thinking. You fry something, There's oil left in the pan, and it feels wasteful to throw it away. So you use it again later. It seems practical. It seems harmless. But this is where things start to become concerning. You may be wondering, what's the big deal? It's just oil. Let me explain it in a way that's easy to picture. Think of fresh cooking oil like clean engine oil in a car. When it's new, it helps everything run smoothly. But once it's been used and heated, it starts to break down. Now imagine taking that same dirty, broken down oil and heating it again and again. It begins to burn at a chemical level, not always visibly but internally. This process creates what we call oxidized compounds and free radicals. Now that may sound technical, but here's what it really means. These are unstable particles that can irritate your cells, much like rust slowly damaging metal over time. And when you eat foods cooked in reheated oil, you're essentially bringing that internal rust into your body. Over time, this can increase inflammation, stress your blood vessels, and yes, according to many studies, contribute to conditions we become more vulnerable to with age, including heart disease and even cancer risk. In my experience, this is something many seniors overlook completely. They're careful about sugar, careful about salt, but they don't realize that reheated oil may be quietly working against their health behind the scenes. And here's another important point. The more times oil is reheated, especially at high temperatures like frying, the more these harmful compounds build up. It doesn't reset when it cools. It gets worse each time. So what can you do instead? Try to use fresh oil whenever possible, especially for high-heat cooking. Avoid reusing oil from frying. And when you cook, consider gentler methods, like steaming, baking, or light sautéing, where the oil isn't pushed to its limit. The takeaway here is very important. It's not just the food you're eating, it's what that food is cooked in. And by simply changing how you use oil in your kitchen, you can reduce a major hidden source of stress on your body without changing your meals drastically at all. Now let's talk about something many seniors rely on as a healthy staple: chicken. And you are absolutely right to choose it. Freshly cooked chicken is an excellent source of protein, especially as we age and need to maintain strength and muscle. But here is what most people over 60 are rarely told. When chicken is reheated, especially more than once, its structure begins to change in ways your body may not handle as easily. In my experience, I see this quite often. Many older adults prepare a batch of chicken, store it, and then reheat portions throughout the week. It feels efficient, and it feels like a healthy routine. But this is where a small issue can begin to develop. Chicken is made mostly of protein, and protein is more delicate than most people realize. Think of it like this. When chicken is freshly cooked, its proteins are arranged in a way that your body can break down and absorb with relative ease. But once it cools, and is then reheated again, that structure begins to tighten and harden. You have probably noticed this yourself. Reheated chicken often becomes drier, firmer, and harder to chew. That is not just a change in texture. It reflects a deeper structural change in the protein. And this is where it starts to matter. Your digestive system now has to work harder to break that protein down. For a younger person, this may go unnoticed. But after 60, digestion naturally becomes a bit slower and more sensitive. What I often hear from patients are things like a heavy feeling after meals, mild bloating, or a sense of fatigue that seems to follow certain foods. And they rarely suspect something as simple as reheated chicken. Now, this is not about avoiding chicken. It is about how it is handled. The concern increases when chicken is reheated multiple times or at high temperatures. In those conditions, both proteins and fats can begin to oxidize, forming compounds that may place additional stress on your digestive system. Research has shown that repeated heating of protein-rich foods can lead to the formation of byproducts that the body has to work harder to process and eliminate. So what can you do in a practical way? Try to prepare smaller portions when possible, so you can enjoy chicken freshly cooked more often. If you do reheat it, use lower heat and add a little moisture, such as broth or water, to make it easier on both the food and your digestion. And most importantly, avoid reheating the same portion more than once. So the takeaway is simple. Chicken itself is not the problem. In fact, it is highly beneficial. But how often you reheat it and how you reheat it can make the difference between supporting your strength and quietly placing extra strain on your digestion. Now, if what we've covered so far is making you look at your kitchen habits a little differently, you're not alone. This is something I hear often from older adults. I wish I had known this sooner. And that is exactly why I share this with you. If you are finding this useful, consider taking a moment to like this video and subscribe to Senior Ever Fit. That way, you can continue receiving clear, practical guidance that helps you take better care of your body, maintain your energy, and stay independent in your daily life. Because small changes, when done consistently, can make a meaningful difference over time. And what we are about to look at next is something I see very frequently in clinical practice, yet most people never suspect it could be affecting them at all. Now let's talk about something very simple, very common, and surprisingly easy to get wrong: cooked rice. Many older adults rely on rice regularly. It feels light, easy to eat, and gentle on the stomach. And when it is freshly prepared, it is usually perfectly fine. But here is what most seniors are never told. Cooked rice can quickly become unsafe to reheat if it is not handled properly from the start. You might be thinking, how could something as plain as rice be a problem? Let me explain. Rice naturally contains tiny bacterial spores known as Bacillus cereus. There is no need to remember the name, but it is important to understand how it behaves. When rice is freshly cooked and eaten right away, there is usually no issue. The problem begins after it is left sitting out. If cooked rice stays at room temperature for too long, on the stove, on the counter, or inside a warm rice cooker, those spores can become active and begin multiplying. Think of it like seeds placed in warm, damp soil. Once the conditions are right, growth begins quietly, even though nothing looks unusual. And here is the part most people never realize. As these bacteria grow, they can produce toxins that are not easily destroyed by reheating. So even if you heat the rice until it is steaming hot again, it may not be as safe as it seems. In my experience, I have seen many older patients come in with sudden stomach discomfort, nausea, or a feeling that something did not sit right after a meal. And they are often surprised when we trace it back to leftover rice. They tell me, "But I reheated it, doctor. I thought that made it safe." And that is a very common misunderstanding. After 60, the digestive system can become more sensitive. The body may not recover from these exposures as easily, so what seems minor can become more noticeable over time. So what can you do to reduce the risk? First, once rice is cooked, avoid leaving it out for long. Aim to cool and refrigerate it within about an hour. Second, store it properly in the refrigerator, sealed well rather than loosely covered. Third, when reheating, make sure it is heated thoroughly, but only once. And if rice has been sitting out for several hours or overnight, it is simply safer not to use it. The takeaway is straightforward. Rice itself is not the issue, but the way it is stored after cooking determines whether it remains safe or becomes a hidden source of trouble for your system. And this is one of the most common habits I encourage older adults to correct, because the difference it makes can be immediate. Now we come to the one I want you to pay the closest attention to, because in my experience, this is where I see the most concern over time. Processed meats. This includes foods like sausages, deli slices, hot dogs, and bacon. Items that are convenient, flavorful, and very common in everyday routines. And here is what most people over 60 are rarely told. It is not only eating these foods, It is reheating them that can make them more harmful. You might be wondering, why would reheating make a difference? Let me explain it simply. Processed meats contain preservatives called nitrites and nitrates. These are added to preserve the meat and maintain its color. On their own, these compounds are already something we are careful about. But when these meats are heated again, especially at higher temperatures, they can form substances known as nitrosamines. And this is where the concern becomes more serious. Nitrosamines are compounds that medical research has linked to an increased risk of cancer, particularly affecting the digestive system. From a clinical perspective, this is something we take seriously, especially for older adults. Because it is not just about one meal, it is the repeated exposure over time that matters. Think of it this way. Your body is constantly repairing small amounts of damage. But when certain harmful compounds are introduced again and again, that repair process can slowly become less effective. And after 60, the body does not recover from that kind of stress as easily as it once did. What I often see is that these foods become part of a routine, a quick breakfast, a simple lunch, or easy leftovers. Then they are reheated, sometimes more than once, without realizing that each round of heat may increase the formation of these unwanted compounds. Now, this is not about fear. It is about making informed decisions. So what can you do in a practical way? First, try to limit processed meats overall, especially as a regular habit. Second, avoid reheating them whenever possible. If you do choose to eat them, it is better to consume them fresh rather than as leftovers. And third, consider simple alternatives such as freshly prepared chicken, fish, eggs, or plant-based proteins, which do not carry the same concerns when handled properly. So here is the most important takeaway from everything we have discussed. If there is one type of food to be especially cautious about reheating, it is processed meats. Because this is where the combination of ingredients and repeated heat creates compounds your body is not well equipped to handle over time. And by reducing this one habit, you may be taking a meaningful step toward protecting your long-term health, in a way many people never realize. So let's take a moment and bring this all together in a simple, clear way. You don't need to fear your food, and you don't need to stop enjoying the meals you're used to. But what most people over 60 never hear is this. It's often not the food itself that causes the problem. It's what happens to that food after it's cooked, stored, and reheated. We talked about potatoes that can grow harmful bacteria if left out too long, cooking oils that break down and turn into damaging compounds when reheated, chicken that becomes harder to digest and more stressful on your system, rice that can carry toxins if not stored properly, and processed meats, which can form harmful substances when reheated that your body struggles to repair over time. Now here's the encouraging part. These are not complicated problems to fix. In my experience, small changes, like storing food properly, reheating only once, avoiding reused oils, and being more mindful with processed meats, can make a real difference in how your body feels day to day. Less bloating, less heaviness, better digestion, and over time, less internal stress on your system. Think of it like reducing the load on an engine that's been running for many years. You're not replacing the engine, you're simply helping it run smoother, longer, and more efficiently. And that's exactly what we want as we age. Simple habits that protect your strength, your comfort, and your independence. Now I'm really curious to hear from you. Which of these foods surprised you the most? Was it something you've been reheating for years without thinking twice? Like rice or chicken? Or maybe processed meats? And more importantly, is there one habit here you feel ready to change starting today? Go ahead and share that in the comments. Your experience might help someone else realize something important about their own daily routine. If you found this helpful, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Senior Ever Fit. This channel is here to give you clear, honest guidance, the kind many older adults tell me they wish they had heard sooner. And don't keep this to yourself. Share this video with a friend, a spouse, or a family member over 60. Because sometimes, one small piece of information like this can make a real difference in someone's long-term health. Stay with us, and I'll continue guiding you step by step toward a stronger, healthier, more independent life. Getting older does not mean your body is failing. It simply means your body needs a little more support, a little more awareness, and a little more care in the small things you do each day. In my experience, the seniors who remain the most active and independent are not the ones doing anything extreme. They are the ones who make simple, consistent adjustments, just like the ones we've talked about today. So don't feel overwhelmed. You do not have to change everything at once. Just begin with one habit, one small improvement, and allow that to build naturally over time. Because your body is still working for you, every single day, often more quietly than you realize. And when you support it in the right way, it can continue to help you stay steady on your feet, clear in your thinking, and confident in your daily life. It is not too late. In fact, this may be exactly the right time to start taking care of yourself in a smarter, more supportive way.